Hello and welcome to Cricket8 Podcast. I'm Megha and joining me is Mash. And today we'd be discussing about how much of T20 cricket, particularly league cricket, is too much. And we try and put a number to it as well, Mash, would we?
Yeah, let's try our best. Yeah.
All right then. Since the inception of the IPL, that was in 2008, we saw leagues mushrooming left, right, and center. Initially, probably it was slow. Big Bash League came in 2011. Then it was Pakistan Super League as well in 2016. And there were multiple leagues in between, CPL being another prominent one, SA20 last year. But it has not stopped. And it's not just restricted to major cricket playing nations. There are also leagues happening in the centers that were otherwise not as much involved with cricket. For example, the Major League Cricket in America. So, factoring in all of that, is it good for cricket? Is it not that great for cricket? Or are there shades in between?
Yeah, it's a really good intro. And it's a really good question because I feel like with all of our episodes, we're caught with between two different arguments here. But every cricket jurisdiction has a right to try and grow the game within their jurisdiction, whether that be India, whether that be the United States, we've Canada. I'm thinking of recent ones. Sri Lanka have just concluded theirs.
Yeah.
I think the Cayman Islands has one that's starting. I think the max 60 is in the Cayman Islands, and that's starting this week or next week. So as a kind of medium by which to grow the game of cricket, it seems like almost like a cut and like a clear cut argument here. Of course, you should have T20 leagues, and they should happen and explode all over the world because that's how the game of cricket will grow. However, the flip side to this argument is at what point, and I ask both you and I ask our audience that's listening, whether live or on the replay, at what point or how many leagues rather is too many, and at what point does it dilute the concept of not only T20 but the concept of cricket as a whole? Now, going further, I don't think that's necessarily the league's fault. A league is going to develop if a league wants to develop. But how many times, and obviously India doesn't have this problem, but how many times can you see, let's use Nicholas Puran as an example, how many times can you see Nicholas Puran play in the course of a year before you start to think, so what matters? Do you get what I'm coming? Like, how many teams can I see Nicholas Puran play for a year before human instinct kicks in and I realize I don't actually care? Because these at least with the IPL, because IPL got out in front of everybody else, whether people like the IPL or whether you're disinterested in the IPL, at least it has a brand significance, right? So I personally fall in the bracket of people that I'm not too invested in IPL, but I know who RCB are. I know who Mumbai Indians are. I
How many
know
trophies have they won?
which one, RCB. Is it zero?
Yes.
So, but the point
Sorry,
is,
RCB fans.
but at least I know them as a brand, and the IPL has protected their brand well enough whereby everybody in the game of cricket, even if you don't like IPL or have no interest in it, you understand that it's the pinnacle of T20 cricket, which starts to then cast a shadow over the other leagues that then develop because people aren't stupid. They can see when a product isn't worth watching, if that makes sense. So there's a lot of things I've spoken too much there, but there's a lot of things to unpick here, and let's see. I mean, we'll get some comments obviously from people. Let's see what direction this goes in.
Economics point of view, of course, it would be making some sense because otherwise we wouldn't be seeing as many leagues as we are seeing right now, and a lot
Mm-hmm.
of them overlapping as well. Now, when the IPL got started back then, at least for the first few years, the league owners, rather the team owners, didn't make a lot of money because if you spoke with them, what they said was that maybe a crore or two for some teams, that too, because they were splurging a lot. They were trying to create this brand and
Mm,
beyond the IPL umbrella, trying to create individual brands as well. But they were pretty clear that the teams that they had bought, the franchises that they had bought, there would be capital appreciation for somebody who bought an IPL team back in 2008, and uh, if that person wants to sell it now, the capital appreciation is tremendous. So
mm,
that's one thing. So IPL, even at the start, after seeing the amount of interest that it generated in the first edition, the franchises were pretty clear. Even if it's not immediate gains, it would be long term gain and a lot of gains. And that obviously we eventually did get to see. So for other leagues that are replicating that model, in fact, in India as well, across sports, we saw multiple leagues coming up. Not all of them generated as much revenue, and not a lot of them could actually sustain themselves for them to come for the subsequent seasons. For example, Pro Kabaddi League is a very good example. Now, it is a sport that a lot of Indians associate with, maybe not something that they see on TV, but they would have seen it, Kabaddi as a sport, growing up around themselves. And
mm.
so, probably there was this connect that they had, and it is something that is obviously rooted in history as well. So they had that connect, and initial few seasons at least, it had a lot of success. It enjoyed a lot of success, and people would remain glued to the television sets. Also, the way it was packaged, because it was a sport that not everybody was entirely familiar with in terms of rules. So, particularly the urban audience, so they were
Mm.
acquainted with the rules. And there was this effort on the part of the broadcasters to educate the people while also entertaining them. So there we are talking about another sport. But now let's again come back to cricket. And with so many leagues, there's one thing for sure, that it's ensuring that players get to make a lot of money, and
Hmm.
there's work around the year for them, for the broadcasters as well. So there's so many stakeholders that get to make money, and the ones that are receiving the paychecks, but the ones that have ventured into it from business point of view, what are their sources of revenues in?
Well, it's a very good question. And actually, I'm glad you said that people are receiving a paycheck, because the one thing we can't blame in all of this is can't blame the talent. You can't blame the players. Where there are leagues and where there is a pay packet, players are going to follow. So as much as I can say, how much interest can I take in Nicholas Puran playing for X number of teams in a year? That's not Nicholas Puran's fault. If people are willing to give him a wage to fly around the world playing in
Yeah.
7 leagues or 8 or 10 leagues in 1 year, he has every right as a player to go and maximize his income and maximize his earnings. So then to hit on that kind of point you made at the very end there in terms of, sorry, where is the money coming from? I mean, I'm going to use CPL actually as an example. My understanding is that CPL, and if there's anybody who's a CPL fan, or if there's anybody from CPL listening to this, my understanding is that hasn't turned a profit yet. Now, CPL has now existed for over 10 years, and you're telling me that as a league and as a brand, despite the way it's marketed itself, they're still saying it hasn't turned a profit. So there has to be an end game here. Now, I think everyone thinks or assumes, and we started to see the first inklings of it in the last, year to 18 months, that the end game here is that IPL owners buy stakes in the
Yeah.
leagues that they think are important. So I think if I bring up, I think only you can bring up the comment, Megha. You see the
Yeah.
one from Makunda? Bring that one up.
Hmm.
Um, Right. So Mukunda says, will cricket become like football clubs eventually? So this is what I'm assuming is the end goal, which is the IPL owners. So if we take Mumbai Indians, I think they're the most noticeable brand probably.
Hmm.
You have MI New York, right? In Major League Cricket. You have MI, there must be an MI South African team, but I can't remember what they're called.
Hmm. Hmm.
So they have already expanded and I think you've got an MI team in the IPL, the not IPL,
Yeah.
the ITL, sorry, whatever it's called, the international one.
Hmm.
So
Legend.
the Dubai one, I can't remember what it's called. I think there's an
Hmm.
MI team there. But
Hmm.
the point is, Mumbai have expanded their brand. The Super Kings have expanded their brand, right? Whether people agree with it or whether people like it, at least you can connect some dots if that makes sense. And we could throw in the Royals brand, Barbados
Yeah.
Royals, Rajasthan Royals, Pal Royals. At least you can connect the dots. The problem I've got I guess I want to say as a neutral voice in all of this is cool. So we can connect the dots in South Africa, even in CPL, IPL, etc. The leagues which fall outside of that, how are they going to exist as an entity if the big brands out of India aren't interested in that league? Like, surely some of these leagues are gonna have to die a natural death at some point, because I just don't see how this ecosystem continues without some leagues naturally dying.
Hmm. I'll take Ruben's comment here and then we can continue the discussion on the same topic because it really
Mm,
connects to the conversation that we are having. He says MLC and Canada's T20 League will pull more young players from the Caribbean to concentrate on T20 cricket as they know they can earn lots of money. Now, looking at it from players' point of view, of course, they will not deny an offer if it is lucrative. Now, there are two sides to it. A conflict of interest scenario as well, potentially, because there are a lot of leagues that overlap. So, for example, a player is featuring in the league stages of a certain league,
mm,
and then the other league starts once the playoffs start in the previous league. So
mm,
then that player would benefit more if the player participates in the second league than continuing for the playoffs of the first league. And
yeah.
that sort of situation did come up during SA20, and that created a lot of confusion, and there was a lot of debate over it. So that's one potential conflict of interest scenario. Now, Pat Cummins, he is not featured in any league, including the Big Bash League, for the longest time, except the IPL, of course. And he showed interest in Major League Cricket. He was given this window for him to recuperate because for the longest time he's been playing cricket. He was the captain of World Test Championship and ODI World Cup winning team of Australia and featured very actively internationally. He wanted a break. He was given that break. MLC has a smaller window. He could fit it in his schedule, and is going to has been featuring in the MLC rather. Now, for him, and he made it very clear that what lured him towards MLC was that the owners of the team that he was playing for, they were venture capitalists, and this is something that Pat Cummins wants to pursue in future. So he wanted
Mm,
those connections. He wanted to have a cup of coffee with them and discuss the potential in future for him. And he's somebody who's obviously also pursued MBA, so it makes sense for him. So maybe the American market and all what America has to offer will still attract people. So even if there aren't a lot of IPL owners involved in the Major Leagues cricket going ahead as well, there would be players interested. But then the question remains for other leagues which do not have Indian interest, because Indian players, in any case, at least the active players, will not be playing in those leagues. Maybe
mm.
those who have taken retirement and then they we could potentially see them there. But how does it make sense financially, economics point of view? So there's still that position of prominence for the brands because they can of course they can woo the Indian market. It's big. We are not trying to project India as the center of the universe, but
Mm,
just looking at it from economics point of view, the Indian market would still be interested, the Indian sponsors would still be interested if the fans are interested. And the
mm.
question then remains, how do these leagues get the fans to be interested? By making the format interesting? Beyond that, what could be done? If they throw more money, they'd get more players, bigger players, but then the money has to be generated as well for them to offer bigger paychecks. So it's like
I
chicken
think
and egg situation.
sorry, as a bell goes behind me, but I think what would be quite interesting would be to I think a good case study would be the Lanka Premier League.
Yeah.
And I hope some Sri Lankan fans will maybe watch this on the repeat if they're not in the live right now. I would love to know if the owners of the Lanka Premier League, the different team owners, believe that the Lanka Premier League, which, in fairness, when you kind of look at the names in that league, it is very much, and you could even argue this for the Bangladesh Premier League as well, it's very much a home tournament, right?
Yeah.
And the standout names are very much focused on Sri Lankan names for a Sri Lankan audience, with this odd smattering here and there of some international stars, right? But never usually the elite stars, if that makes sense. So I would love to know if the owners within the Lanka Premier League believe that actually LPL can survive in and of itself in a Sri Lankan market, make money within that market, be a gateway for the next kind of stars of Sri Lankan cricket, which then provides a natural gateway to watch those players if they bother to play some red ball, ODIs, etc., etc. I would love to know if that model with that particular country works for them, because I don't get the impression that IPL owners are interested in investing, not yet anyways, in LPL. Or now here's a flip side to my argument there. Is the LPL only surviving right now because it's not overlapping too much with other leagues? And if all of a sudden Major League Cricket expanded to be a longer window,
Yeah.
or the 100 started earlier, I think they're the main two tournaments that kind of cross over where LPL is. Would LPL then naturally suffer because whatever stars they can attract would actually want to go to MLC or go to the 100 or whatever it might be? So I guess what I'm trying to say to you, Megha, is I wonder if some of the competitions that currently exist only are existing at the moment just because the crossover isn't fully there yet. The calendar is so unregulated that everyone's trying to find their specific window.
Yeah.
But this is what I keep saying to you. I suspect that we will reach a natural point where only some leagues can exist in certain windows because the talent will go where the money is and where the TV audience is. And it's interesting because this is why and again, that's why I think the LPL is a good example to use. Like I say, if they think they can survive in a Sri Lanka only market, then yeah, maybe you can have as many T20 leagues as you want, as long as you have a viable audience from an economic perspective that justifies a league. I don't know.
In fact, MLC as well, it started only last year.
Mm.
So Sri Lanka Premier League had that window for the longest time, and yet you'd see, for various reasons, the owners backing out. So there has been no stability as well in the league, and there are at two opposite ends of the spectrum, because on one side there is SA20, and on the other side there is Sri Lankan Premier League, Lankan Premier League. Now the challenge for the Lankan Premier League is to stay up afloat. Whereas in case of South Africa, South African board had been struggling for a considerable while with various financial issues. Their sponsors were backing out, but then last year came SA20, and since then we are hearing reports of the country doing well financially when it comes to cricket. So it has helped generate a lot of revenue for the board, and that's of utmost significance because that could be labeled as a success story. We are not talking about a market that is already ready, that is already consuming a lot of cricket, but they turned it into a market that again became interested in cricket. There are also questions that is it encroaching upon the space that is designated to test cricket, and I beg to differ on that. T20 cricket and the league cricket, what it's trying to do, it's not trying to get the test fans converted into T20I fans if they are strictly in that category, test fan category. But they're trying to win over new audiences. And that audience base, if it gets too interested in cricket, might just also start taking interest in test cricket. Not a lot of it, not the entire segment of it, but some percentage of it. So it's not a lose all situation for test cricket with so many T20 leagues. And again, they're not competing with each other, is what I believe. Now, there are a lot of questions, and Pratik, he has a point about how international cricketers and big names as well are now prioritizing, because he is taking Trent Bolt's example, who refused to take up the central contract and make himself available for the New Zealand cricket. And that also happened very recently with Kane Williamson, who was leading the side in T20 and ODI still recently. And with him not taking up the central contract, New Zealand board has been flexible. It's also now down to what stance the boards take. We'd get to that point later. But this situation where international stars are now picking and choosing, and Kane Williamson refused to take up the central contract because, remind you, IPL window is anyway open for him. New Zealand board would not be asking him to participate in any international tournament around that time, rather international series around that time. But it is for SA20 and other such tournaments that Williamson refused to take up the central contract.
Yeah, I think this is the natural way that the game is going. And it goes back to that point about will we have leagues operating like football clubs? And I was actually going to answer you later on, but we can get to it now. Where do you stand on the idea that so Puran hasn't done so yet? Or he's always my go-to example to use, or Hetmeyer from a West Indian perspective. If you were Nicholas Puran or Shimron Hetmeyer, would you
Wow.
sign a would you sign a deal that commits you to a franchise? So I think in IPL at the moment, I think Puran plays for, is it LSG? Is that the team he plays for?
Hmm.
The super
Yeah.
yeah, plays for them.
Lucknow.
Now, yeah, but then if you see him in other leagues, sometimes he's playing for Mumbai Indian, like New York or that. So right now he's not committed to any particular franchise. He just goes where whoever's going to pay him the best, right? And whatever suits him. But if you were someone like a Puran or Hetmeyer, I mean, they already don't play any format of cricket for West Indies outside of T20s pretty much. So does it make sense to sign up to a franchise and say, I will represent your teams around the world? And because, and then his calendar's clear, if you see what I mean, because once these players are like, right, so again, let's use again let's use the Royals. Hetmeyer plays for Rajasthan Royals. He would then represent Pal, he would represent Barbados, and whatever other Royals teams exist around the world. And then it would allow him to effectively say to the West Indies, or the Royals organization say to the West Indies, we effectively own Shimron Hetmeyer. He is our player. Um, we will make him available for international cricket in these designated windows. So I think we're to me we're at the beginning, the very beginning of the eventual conclusion, which is teams own players, and we have international windows where the teams, like football, where the teams release their players to go and play for. I think that's. I don't know how long it's going to take us to get there, but I just feel like that's the
Hmm.
natural conclusion to what must happen. And then to go full circle to the beginning of our argument, this is why I think some leagues will just naturally have to die. Because if teams are going to own players, only certain leagues can really exist for that to happen, and for the audience to see those leagues as a justifiable brand to watch. I don't know, maybe you might not agree with me, but I just feel like it's a slow creep to that conclusion.
What these leagues that do not have IPL investment or IPL owners investment, and these peripheral leagues that we are talking about, they also allow uh, cricket fraternity to do is test the market. For example,
Mm, mm,
MLC tested the American market, and there was a certain level of interest that it had for cricket, and that's why, of course, the World Cup as well enjoyed whatever success it did. Now, I think that was the idea thought going ahead. That's why the IPL owners plunged into other leagues as well. But I wonder, would it suit the owners themselves to retain these players and form a sort of retention model with these players, because the combinations, the requirements of different leagues would differ. So the sort of 11 or 15 that you'd want for A country would not be same as the one that you'd want for B
mm,
country. So
mm,
would you
mm,
want to keep those people on your payroll? For example, three spinners in India, but would you want to keep as many in your squad when it is the US market, when it is rather the US which is hosting the games? So
mm,
that makes for an interesting question. And apart from that as well, when comparing it to football, because in case of football that has been happening for a very long time, so there are no debates around it. There are
mm,
multiple leagues that are happening simultaneously. We just talk about, we primarily focus on the top 5, but beyond that top 5 as well, there are so many thriving leagues around the world. Every country almost has its own. But we're not talking about dilution of talent, because unlike cricket, football, at least 100 countries take it with some level of seriousness. And
yeah, yeah,
beyond that
yeah, yeah,
100 as
yeah.
well, there are a lot of other countries playing. So the amount of talent that is present in case of football, that's enormous. When it comes to cricket and the top players playing the leagues, it's just those 10, 12 countries which are churning out these players. We're not talking about, say, a player from Uganda who's featuring in an IPL or any other league for that matter. So, uh, probably that direct comparison is not possible. And in football, it's predominantly around the leagues, and then there is a small window where the World Cup is held. Remember the World Cup when it was held in the previous edition of the World Cup when it was held in Qatar. There were so many questions around what window would fit in, how would it make sense, because it's going to be very hot in the usual summer window. So then they were held in winters. So all of those conversations probably make it slightly unfair for us to compare
Mm.
football and cricket.
Do you know what? I hear that. Um, I'm gonna throw PSL into the mix because
Hmm.
PSL. The reason I want to throw PSL into the mix is because obviously PSL almost is its own entity, and doesn't it doesn't obvious for obvious reasons it doesn't come into the conversation when we talk about IPL owners and blah blah blah. So let me just throw PSL into the mix here. There is a kind of crunch moment though that will come because I agree with you that football and cricket is not a direct comparison that we can make, and oh, but so let me tell you, it's not a direct comparison that we can make. But if we use PSL is an entity that will continue to exist no matter what, because within its own right, Pakistan has a market of cricket fans that they know they can market to and can make a profit, and so on and so forth. If you are a cricketer who signs a contract with a franchise owner, what then happens to the leagues like PSL or even an LPL or whatever it might be that currently doesn't have any kind of IPL franchise involvement? Do you think that once a player signs that contract, they effectively can't go to those other sub leagues then? Do you see what I mean? Because that's what I think will also be quite interesting. So, will we be creating like a tiers of cricketers? Those who get the big deals, so like your Jofra
Yeah.
Archers and your Purans and your this, that, and the others who get the big 4-year deals, and then you have the other people who will never get those big franchise deals, but they continue to do the T20 circuit in leagues that have managed to find a niche that they can fit into, that they can market in and of their own rights, which operates outside the ecosystem, but they're economically viable enough to just continue. So therefore, the B ranked or B tier players make their money that way. Do you see my argument there?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's what's happening at the moment as well. And Avinash cites an example here. He says Rashid Khan didn't play PSL last year because he wanted his fitness to be there. It's his choice. Now, we don't exactly know about the nature of his injury and whether that was manageable, whether he could have taken that to the PSL. Ishit makes another point and he says, do you think at some point the cricketers will not be stuck with the central contracts and become freelancers because there's so many opportunities? But the central contracts, they were introduced, and probably, hopefully, someday we can do a separate video on that because that as well is a very contentious topic, and we love to pick up contentious topics between the two of us. But central contracts were introduced to provide a sort of cushion to the players, to provide a sort of security to the players, and that was introduced in Australia initially, and then the other boards followed up. Now, in Asia, the approach towards central contract is very different because we saw Pakistan's stance. Three of their top players, including Babar Azam, Shaheen Afridi, were not allowed to participate in the leagues, in the other leagues, including the MLC, even during a window where there was no international action happening. They wanted the players to preserve themselves for the season that was to follow. So, what to what extent do the boards get to have a say, get to put their foot
Mm,
down? Because we've seen a level of leniency in case of New Zealand. It's very glaring, it's very apparent. We're talking about two players who've got to benefit from that leniency, or probably leniency shouldn't even be the word because it's their right to a
mm.
great extent as to how they go about managing their cricket. And then with England and Australia as well. Remember 2012 when Kevin Peterson had to actually revolt against the ECB because he wanted to participate in a full year of IPL. Back then, ECB was not as serious about the IPL. It only became serious once it realized that, and that too back in 2015 World Cup, that things weren't that great with them in their case, with the players not focusing as much on the format. And IPL
Mm.
allowed them to focus on that format to nurture their skills, to hone their skills.
Yeah, and listen. We do this deliberately now, for those of you listening live. Megha and I reach a point where we know, as we will say this every episode, where we know we could take this further, but we deliberately now stop at the half hour mark because we want to then turn the debate over to you all in the comments. Based on everything that we said so far, what's your stance? What's your stance on this? It's a really good question we put there. How much is too much? Is there too much? Because maybe we could have changed the question. Is there too much T20 League cricket? Arguably, some might say, actually, Megha and Machel, there's not even that much going on right now. I don't know. So maybe the question is even the wrong question to pose. But either way, get at us in the comments below. If you're watching this on the replay as well, get us in the comments below. How much T20 cricket is too much? Can we strip it back? If we strip it back, what are we stripping it back to? Because clearly cricket, one thing is clear, Megha, and I'll hand back to you. I think the one thing that we might possibly agree on this is that whatever people's answers are on this, just letting it continue the way it currently is and sticking our heads in the sand isn't necessarily going to fix or answer these questions, because I think everybody, no matter what region of the world they're in, is currently looking at the T20 leagues and going, so what's going on, and like what's the answers to all of this, and is the system correct right now? Do we need to have some more regulation? So everyone's got questions about this. Let's see what the people in the comments say afterwards.
Interesting. And there are a lot of interesting comments as well. I reckon we're not in a position to answer them, or probably just discuss them. Answer would be quite an odd thing to say. Ruben says, not related to cricket, not related to the topic that we're discussing, but his question for you: in Olympics cricket competition, will Caribbean countries have their own teams or compete as West Indies? Quick response to that. And Prateek has also brought up the fact that even the 100 is now interested in IPL ownership, and that conversation has been happening for a while now. By the end of this year, and probably in the next season, we'd see some of IPL representation there. So we do need IPL owners' participation for the leagues to probably capture the attention of Indian market more than what it's already doing. But anyway, to answer Ruben's question, and then we conclude there.
Yeah, I'll just answer that question. So, Ruben, what generally happens with a Olympic? The best example to use is what happens with the Commonwealth Games. So, in the Commonwealth Games, a West Indies team doesn't enter. So, what should happen, or what I believe would happen, is a domestic competition is held in the. So, let's say it's T10. Becomes the Olympic format. A domestic competition will be held between the different associations in the Caribbean. And then the winning team, whether that be Jamaica, Guyana, Barbados, whatever, will then go and represent the region in the Olympics. The only possible way that would differ is what happened at the 2012 Olympics in the UK, where Great Britain was allowed to field a football team. So I'm not saying that we couldn't somehow come to some kind of agreement which says the West Indies can field a team in the Olympics, but that would be for the IOC to come to some kind of agreement, given that all the different islands would have their own athletes and competitions outside of that. But it's going to be very, very interesting. Anyways, that Olympic debate, Megha and I will get round to that, because surely that's another topic we have to address at some point in time.
Thank you for proposing another topic. Now, ahead of the next podcast, we wouldn't have to brainstorm as much looking for a topic. And there's so many interesting questions. My apologies for not being able to take all of them, but we'd request you, we'd urge you to keep the continue, or rather keep the debate on, rather continue the debate in the comment section below. As of now, thank you so much for joining. Thank you so much, Mash, for joining as well.
As ever, thank you.